Now, Donald Trump's attempts to build a border wall between the U.S. and Mexico are being kind of stymied, not only, of course, by Democrats in Congress who refuse to fund the wall, but now also Texas landowners who live on the border. So now there's reporting this in HuffPost on Wednesday, which pointed out that in Laredo, near the border, landowners have been receiving letters from the federal government. Now, these letters are basically requests to have people come in and survey their land to see whether or not they want to actually build a section of border wall. Now, it turns out there's a lot of people living in those border areas that own land or their families have owned the land for generations that really don't want the federal government coming in and building a wall on their land. That makes sense. So now the Trump administration, of course, look, they're currently looking to secure some of this land in order to build their sections of Trump's wall. Now they're doing that. They're actually in a big hurry, which is really important as we get further into the story as to the mechanism of how they're going to try to secure this land and how they're also securing land so far. But they're looking to do this before 2020, and it's really important to them to get it done as fast as possible. Now, the first part of this effort, of course, is asking for permission to do a land survey, which, of course, makes sense, right? So they do the land survey. They find out, okay, this is where we want to build that piece of the wall. Now we got to get permission from the landowners in order, or not just permission, but we got to buy up this land from the landowner so that we can build on this piece of land, right? So now two places that have seen a lot of attention are Webb County and in the Rio Grande Valley, right? So according to NBC News, the administration has moved ahead with construction of new barriers, these steel slats, in the Rio Grande Valley recently, and as of last week, the administration is also preparing court filings to seize more land in that same area before the end of the month. And one of the problems these landowners are having, not only with big government coming in and asking to survey, but after the surveys, they're not telling landowners how much they would actually receive for that land to build a wall on. So they're not getting a lot of answers to these questions. These are really important questions. How much are you going to give us if we sell you those pieces of land? How much are they worth, etc.? And the government seems to have no answers other than, well, we want to build it anyway. Now, these same landowners are also being encouraged by the government to sign waivers to allow federal surveyors onto their land for free. Now, according to Ricky Garza, he's an attorney with the Texas Civil Rights Project, a landowner is under no obligation to sign that right of entry to allow them free access to their property. But it is in the government's interest to have them sign, of course, because they don't want lawsuits. In fact, they don't want the landowners to ever see the inside of a courtroom. And so basically, they don't want to get sued. Now, Garza said most of his clients are in the early stages of this battle, fighting in court on the issue of granting the government access to survey their land. Now, if they are allowed, of course, to survey the land, and it's a good place to find to build a barrier, then the government will first offer the landowners money. We'll buy you out. If that doesn't happen, then the government can seize their land for construction. That's the plan here, right? So now David Byer, immigration policy analyst at the Cato Institute, by the way, it's a libertarian think tank. Turns out even the libertarians seem to be against big government coming in and seizing people's lands. Now, he's quoted in HuffPost as saying, quote, I think he's not going to mess around by trying to negotiate beforehand, he says of the Trump administration. And he doesn't have to. According to the courts and statutes, he can get away with just taking the land and putting a $100 price tag on everything. He can do that and leave it to the courts to figure out what is just compensation somewhere down along the line. So that's true, then that's disastrous if you're a landowner that doesn't want to sell their land or have a piece of wall built on their land. Now, how can they get away with this? Now, that's really important. This is not eminent domain. This is actually something far worse than eminent domain. The Trump administration's ability to seize land for the border wall actually comes from a Great Depression era policy called a Declaration of Taking. So the Taking Act was passed by Congress. Now, it wasn't passed in order to build racist border walls. The original purpose was to help spur the economy through construction projects and job creation. So this seems like one of these New Deal era policies that had good intentions. You know what? We're going to use this declaration of taking. We're going to take this area and we're going to build on it. We're going to build highways. We're going to build, do these projects, public works. And we're going to do that. And we're going to create jobs. However, unfortunately, the Trump administration, they're like, declaration of taking. Well, looks like we know how we can get past this pesky issue of landowners not wanting to sell us their land so we can build a wall on it. Now, it's being seen as the Trump administration's alternative to the slow-moving eminent domain lawsuits of the time. The idea is to fast-track seizures, which would allow the federal government to build public works projects and generate jobs. That's so. Actually, no, I was wrong in saying the Trump administration, but yes, this is what they're using that for to build a wall. Back then, it was said we got to get these projects moving so we can get the economy moving. So I get that, right? Unfortunately, these are not public works now. It's a vanity wall project in order to help Trump win in 2020, to get reelected by his incredibly racist base, to get people out to the polls. So this is what they're doing. This is what they're doing to actually try to build that wall. They take money from the military and land from the Texans. So, great. Now, this particular act, by the way, has been used by the right wing before. It was back during the George W. Bush administration. Now, this has led to lawsuits that are still being litigated in court. So, they're even being litigated to this day. I thought Republicans were against big government coming in and taking your land, taking your property. I thought private property was one of the tenets of conservatism. Apparently not. Apparently not under George W. Bush, and apparently not under Donald Trump. It's disastrous. All right, so now, one landowner, David Acevedo, obviously he's against the idea of the government just taking his land. And so he's been involved in the process. He's been asking a lot of questions the government can't really answer. Now, here's the thing. Acevedo he's a Texan, right? And so he's not like a bleeding heart liberal. In fact, he loves border security. He's not against border security. He grants Border Patrol access to his land whenever they ask for it. But he says, look, this is a bad idea. Don't come in and start taking Texans' lands. You can't do that. He says, in fact, quote, get them helicopters, get them drones, get vehicles, get them technology. But when they come and they say they're going to take something by eminent domain or whatever, well, that's when I put my foot down. Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? So this is an unlikely development, right? This is an unforeseen development. Conservatives in Texas saying, well, we don't want your wall. We don't want you to build it here. We want you to do other things. Yes, we want you to enforce the border, but we don't want this wall in our property. We don't want it here. Find someplace else or don't do it at all. Because we're not going to let you come in and take our property. Now, the thing is, like I said, the Trump administration is using this in order to build their wall, in order to get reelected. That's essentially what it is, because it would be essentially the only actual policy accomplishment for his base. And the administration knows that. I mean, they can't really hang their hat on anything else. I mean, what do they have? The first thing that they did, tax cuts for the rich. Now, those tax cuts for the rich, they're not exactly popular. I think they're somewhere around 30% popularity, right? And so what else can they do? What else can they point at and say, oh, look, the economy is great because of the tax cuts? Not really. Look, when you look at, for example, yes, the unemployment rate is fairly low, but you look at the quality of those jobs. And then you look at the pay of those jobs, which is fairly stagnant. You look at all these layoffs from these big companies that made billions of dollars, that saved millions on these tax cuts. You can't look at that and say resounding success. And so all they have is this border wall. And so what they're going to do is that they're going to steal American citizens' land in order to try to build it and rob from the military. It's insane. And if you continue to support this, then look, you're supporting stealing private property in order to fund nothing more than a wall that people are going to find a way to circumvent very, very easily. It's disastrous all around. And it's interesting to see now that Texans are fighting against it. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.